Hi, I'm indie fantasy author Melinda Kucsera, and in this episode of Fantasy, Lore, and More, we have LL Nelson, and she's here to talk to me about her book, Modern Day Muses. So let's hear all about Modern Day Muses, which you were trying to tell me about before the interview started.
So, Modern Day Muses is the second book in my historical fantasy time travel series that I like to say is Doctor Who meets Greek mythology with a dash of Outlander. I have to emphasize it's just a dash of Outlander because Outlander's spicy.
Yes.
And I want to say it's a historic, like there's a historical romance between, people in two different time periods. And that's the Outlander element. However, my scenes are very much closed door. That they're like, these are adults we're talking about. They're going to be doing hanky panky, but I'm not going to be describing it. So that's where I'm like, it's a dash of Outlander. So, I've also had some people say that it has some A Wrinkle in Time vibes, but I feel like Wrinkle in Time is more like children's literature, but I could see because there's some time travel that goes on in the series in the Wrinkle in Time quartet. Yeah. But and I mean I love Madeline Langell stuff. So
I tried reading it when I was 14, I think 13, 14. I couldn't get through it. Like you need a dictionary to read her stuff. She was just unnecessarily fond of large words. If there was a big word that meant the same thing as another word, like she would use that one. And I never got past like the first couple of chapters. And like I thought about trying to read it as an adult, but like that visceral sense of like the little girl who DNF'd it like will not let go. She's like it's a chokehold on me.
The funny thing is, before I read A Wrinkle in Time, I read The Young Unicorns, also by Madeline Langell, and that was, I want to say, in like 4th grade.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like now I was homeschooled as a kid, so what my
I wasn't,
class
obviously.
What?
I wasn't, obviously.
my
public school
was very unusual. And so, but I read The Young Unicorns, and that's a lot more, I don't want to say it's less kid friendly, but a lot more big words and bigger vocabulary. And so when I started reading A Wrinkle in Time after reading The Young Unicorns, I'm like, oh, this is easy stuff. Time travel, scientific. But I mean, so it wouldn't surprise me that a little bit of a little bit of Wrinkle in Time vibes came through, because that was one of my favorite book series as a kid. But yeah, I like to say Doctor Who meets Greek mythology, with a dash of Outlander, and that's what the series is. And so Modern Day Muses is book 2. Book 1, the main character Alex goes back to Herculaneum, and she has to save this guy Titus in order to come back home. Obviously, they do come back. That's Modern Day Muses. They arrive back in 2009, Washington, D.C., and now Titus has to adjust to the modern world, and Alex has to adjust to the fact that time travel does exist and that all of these different pantheons are actually real. They're just not the way that they were told in like, history and lore and all that kind of stuff. And so there's also the same antagonist from book 1, Fortuna, is back after them in book 2, and she's mad that they got away, and she's like, just because you're back in your period, your time period, doesn't mean that I'm not going to come after you and give you trouble. Yeah. And I'm trying to say this in a way that doesn't give spoilers, but yes, Fortuna causes mayhem for Alex and Titus, and they have to deal with that. They also have to deal with uh, trust and their, growing relationship and everything, because they only knew each other for maybe a month-ish in Herculaneum before arriving back in the 21st century. And so that's what a lot of modern day muses, even though it's not a kind of traditionally historical fantasy, it's more of the um it's more of like, I want to say the fantasy elements, like the contemporary fantasy, I guess. I'm trying to think what the genre exactly would be, because we're still not quite far enough away from 2009 to be considered historical fiction. Give it 10 years.
But like if they're going back in time, doesn't that technically make it historical fiction in a sense?
It could be. It depends on who you ask, because some people are like, it is historical fiction if it is not our time period. But they are time travelers. And but yeah, the modern day muses touches a lot on um the sort of the background of the muses, their lives. They talk about Alex gets to interact with some of Cleo's sisters, and they talk about some of their, I don't say past lives, but like, because they don't ever die, but like, past experiences and whatnot. Um, the Muses have not only a place in Washington, DC, but then also in New Jersey,
Oh,
Montclair, New Jersey.
where do they fall in the debate about whether or not there's a what is that called? Middle Jersey? I can't think of the. There's been this debate that there's like northern New Jersey, southern New Jersey, and there's like this middle area. Like even like what's his name? The singer has weighed in on it. I can't remember exactly because like I live in New York, so like
Yeah.
I'm aware of it. Central Jersey, that's what it is.
Central Jersey.
The what's his name? He sings the Living on a Prayer song.
Bon Jovi.
Oh no, he's not it's Springsteen. He's
Springsteen,
from
Bruce
Jersey.
Springsteen.
That's what I
Okay.
meant. I don't know why I associate that song with him when I know he didn't sing it. But like that's just the quirky way my brain works. Yeah. So do they have an opinion on whether Central Jersey exists?
Not really, and partially that's because they are thousands of years old, and so they're aware that, like, us geographical spaces, they change over time.
Mm.
So, like, they were there, you know, bef you know, when, like, mainly they were in Europe and the Mediterranean area, and then when people started coming to America, they came as well. And they're also immortals who are native to the Americas, native to there's immortals wherever there's humans, there's immortals, because the immortality aspect is just a genetic thing. Some
Hmm.
people, for whatever reason, their genes make it so that once they hit a certain age, they don't age anymore. And so, um, for them, they're just like, we've been around so long that, yeah, Jersey, whatever you feel happy calling it, go for it.
So they don't weigh in on the debate about hoagies or God, I forgot the other thing they call it. I'm sorry.
No, it's
I
fine.
I deal with a lot of people from New Jersey. There's always the debates about these things.
No, they don't have hardcore debates on that kind of stuff. They might jokingly be like, "Oh yeah, I totally like this," and call it something like a certain name, knowing that there'll be another immortal or another time traveler or someone who's like, "No, it is this other name." And it's not really
That is
anything
the
like,
essence of being from Jersey.
yeah, but
Two
they're
of them agree on anything. It's like in
yeah,
New York when you can't agree on where upstate begins or
yeah.
what is considered upstate.
Is it just anything other than the city, or is it there's a certain line?
It depends on where you live in New York. If you're in the city, then anything outside like the Bronx, you consider upstate. But if you're from like the county immediately outside of New York City, which is like where I live,
Mhm.
you consider like anything north of you. Like I consider where I grew up, which is the next county over, which is like 20 minutes away by car to be upstate.
That's awesome.
When I lived in that county growing up, I considered everybody in the county above me as upstate.
Basically, whatever is north of you is upstate. You are never upstate.
Yeah, or west, because New York is wider than it is
Yeah.
tall. So
Yeah.
upstate is like just anybody who's not in your county usually.
That's
It's
awesome.
hilarious, and there are like humor arguments about it, humorous arguments, not anything like serious.
Just like what is considered the South, having grown up in Virginia,
Oh,
there's
really? I didn't know
there's
about
some
that.
people are very passionate about that. Like, because there's some people who are from, like, the deep South that are like, "Virginia is not part of the South." And people in Virginia are just like, "We are part of the South.
You're
We were."
south of the Mason-Dixon line.
Yeah. Yeah, and so but people in Virginia will say, technically, Maryland was south of the Mason-Dixon line, but people in Virginia will say Maryland is not the South. And it's very interesting. So, like, I grew up thinking Virginia was the northernmost part of the South, but I knew people from Alabama who are like, "Virginia's not part of the South. It's part of the North." And even, like, people are like, what are you talking about?" So, yes, there's a very passionate about how far north that geographic area goes. How far north, how far west? Is Texas part of the South? Is Texas its own thing?
It's its own thing. I've
Yeah.
been to Texas. I've been to some states in the South. I've been to Virginia, Georgia, Maryland, the Carolinas. Yeah, Texas is its own thing. It
Texas
is.
is its own
It is
thing,
its
yeah.
own thing. It's not. If someday it decides to break off and be independent, I would not be surprised. I'm not sure the rest of the country would even notice because it's kind of its own thing. It doesn't even most of it's not even on the same grid as the rest of us.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
It's totally I've been there to visit family. It is like going to another country. It is
Yeah.
very different.
I think the last time I was there was, like, in the 90s, and, we went to, like, Dallas and that area, and yeah,
I went to Houston. That's where
yeah.
my family
Well,
is.
Houston's its own, even other parts of Texas, Houston is his own thing.
Mhm.
And I think there's also just the fact that it's so massive. It's like California in the fact that there's multiple, like, uh biomes within Texas. So you have a very, like, where Houston is, it's much more humid and much more green and much more like the Gulf Coast.
Yeah.
But then you go to El Paso, and El Paso is nothing like Houston, even though they're technically in the same state. And technically, El Paso is closer to other state capitals than it is to its own state capital.
Yeah.
So
You can
it's
drive for 10 hours in Texas and still be in
in
Texas.
Texas. Yeah. Oh,
And you're
yeah.
probably not anywhere near where you were trying to get.
Yes. Yes. And the same thing with California, only if you're going north.
Yeah,
Um,
I've driven from San Francisco to LA
yeah.
down Pacific Coast Highway 1.
And that
Before
is
there was all this was back in the early 2000s. I know parts of that don't exist anymore.
oh, yeah, because they have to, like, move it in because the coast uh keeps fall the cliffs keep falling.
So if
Um,
that keeps happening in like 100 years, like, will there be much California left?
well, I mean, either there'll be no California or California will be an island. I mean, that's what people keep saying. But the
So
interesting thing is that,
California will be an island, Texas will be its own country.
yeah, it's just, if we go back to, like, the way that the world was when the dinosaurs were here, then the entire, um, Midwest will be an ocean.
Yes.
And so, yeah,
And at one point, the eastern part of the US was part of Africa,
yeah. And the fact that
I
the
think.
Appalachians, um, all that is actually connected to, like, the mountainous areas in Scotland are made of the same rock. It's the same,
I believe
uh
it.
and it was just when those 2 continents pulled apart that they became separate. But yeah, that's why I heard there was, lore about, um, that a lot of the cryptids that are talked about in Appalachia, I don't know if I'll ever be able to pronounce it correctly, but those mountains are similar to the cryptids in like Scotland because they're
Yes.
all coming from the same time period and the same like geographic thing.
And the same myths too.
Yeah.
There's this YouTube, not YouTube. There, wait, I think he also has YouTube. There's this podcast, like, what is it? What is it? I forgot what the podcast name is now that I like, and he reads out people write in their cryptid sightings, and it's
Yeah.
so fun to listen to. And people write in from like all over the world, mostly from the Pacific Northwest, and
Yeah.
there'll be people who write in from Scotland and from other parts of the northern part of the UK. And it's just interesting. And there's been speculation about some of the cryptids being like caught over there when things drifted, like you were just talking about. And a lot of the myths are similar, which there was a whole thing about that on the podcast. What if it's true? That's the name of the podcast. What if it's true with Cam?
Yeah.
I forgot his last name, but he's a really fun podcast host. I like that podcast. And I think it's Appalachia because I like the Old Gods of Appalachia podcast, and that's how they pronounce Appalachia. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Old Gods of Appalachia. That's their accent.
I'll have to check out that podcast. What if it's true? Because that's kind of like that's my vibe. What if all these stories were actually true?
Oh, it's so fun. He's such a nice guy, Cam, too. He says he's not really a believer. He would like to believe, but he likes people to write in their stories and he reads them on his podcast. So, so it's really neat because almost all the stories he's reading are from just regular people who see something and need to talk about it. And so they write down, and some of these people are like really like fascinating, the stories. It's real. I think that's why I like it, is because it's not authors, it's not curated. I mean, it is a little because he chooses which ones to read. He gets so many, but he does as many as he can in every episode, and they're just written by like regular people, and it's just, I don't know, I find it really fascinating.
It sounds amazing. Yeah, I'm gonna check out the podcast.
It's on all the things. I listen to it through Audible, but it's on all the things. And I think he also has a YouTube channel for it.
Yeah.
He goes to like the Bigfoot conferences sometimes too.
That's awesome.
Just for fun. He gets invited because he's been doing this podcast forever. There's so many episodes. It's a free podcast to listen to. And there's not a ton of ads. I really like it.
Yeah. Awesome. Now I'm like, I have to check this out. I'm like reaching more for my phone. No, I'm on a podcast.
I'll send you it afterwards. Yeah, it's What If It's True is I think it was Cam Collins is his last name. I can send you the link to it. I like it. He puts up a lot of he records a lot. He likes doing it. So yeah, we've gotten off topic somehow. How do we get on cryptids? Oh, time travel.
Travel, history, people's perceptions.
Are there cryptids in your Sydney while we're on the subject? In your is Bigfoot going to make an appearance?
Maybe, I don't know. The world is open to all, because like I said, the idea is that all of these stories that we heard that were like mythology are real. Cryptids basically could exist and probably do exist, just not in the way that the stories have been told about them. And so, for example, there is a character who's going to show up in book 4, who is a vampire. But the way that he is a vampire is different than like your traditional Bram Stoker vampire. Like he does have to drink blood and stuff, but he's not like, oh, like he's not like Count Dracula. But the
he does other things than search for blood.
Yes. Like in the modern day, he's like, I can get blood from Amazon. Like,
I mean, you probably could.
But like you don't, like modern day vampires don't have to like go and sink their fangs into someone in order to feed. They can go to, you know, they could honestly go to a butcher shop or go to a farmer or whoever and be like, I will buy cow blood or whatever, like animal blood when you are processing meat, and I will pay you for it. And, most people are gonna be like, okay, whatever.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
getting
hustle
paid.
culture. And you wanna buy this blood and you'll give me money? Sure, here you go. Like I
Yeah,
feel
I
like
don't
with
know what you're
hustle
doing with it.
culture, yeah, I feel like with hustle culture, like if you offered money for something and it was like not a, and it was going to be a byproduct of what someone was doing anyways, and they weren't going to use it, they'd be like, sure, how much
Yeah,
you want, how often you want to come for it.
exactly. Oh, absolutely. And so that's how a lot of like the more modern day vampires. One of my kids is just knocked on the door to get my attention. And
They
I'm
heard you
just like,
talking about vampires and they were like, yes.
yes. And my husband's in the
They've been
kitchen like,
summoned.
don't knock on the door. He's trying to he's trying to help, which is awesome. I love that it's my son. But no, so yeah, so there's a character in um book 4. I'm not
Mhm.
gonna say who it is, but who ends up being a vampire. And I won't talk about more of their because like their um um who they are truly is part of the story and how they connect with everything. But yes, vampires, cryptids, all sorts of mythological creatures and stories all real within this world. It's just that the stories that we heard about them aren't may not be exactly what they really were. Because there's like I was, when I was, you know, researching a lot of these stories and characters, there's actually a couple characters in modern day muses who are from Roman myths and like the mythic Roman kings and different deities and that kind of stuff. And they're now living in, New Jersey, just chilling and making good Italian food and, plant like tending to their garden. Like that's one of the characters, and this isn't too much of a spoiler because she's a bit of a side character. Anne, her actual who she actually so like, you know, in everyday world, she's Anne, she, works at a local school. She's your neighbor who has a really great green thumb, who just, loves to plant anything and everything. But in reality, she's Fortuna Honoria, who is an ancient Roman goddess of good luck, good fortune in harvest, in agriculture. And her husband, Tully, is um a mythic character from not like a god or a goddess, but a mythic character from Roman mythology. And they've been together for thousands of years through various iterations. And so um that's kind of the vibe that I'm going for, is that they were these mythic characters, but the stories that were told about them were kind of, as time has passed, the stories have changed. So the stories we have now are different than what the truth was. And they're sort of like, okay, whatever. But now in the modern day, I'm just going to chill in my garden and make really good Italian food. And if you don't eat tons of it, then you're insulting my honor and that kind of stuff. And so, um, not that they're really insulting their honor, but, they're very much, more than happy to not be in the limelight, not be in the public eye, but just to relax and chill and be with family and friends and, um, make lots of good food. And, like, there's a scene in this book that, there you get to see what the muses do for Thanksgiving. And they absolutely go all out for Thanksgiving, having people, come, and there's food and there's celebrations, and they go to the Macy's Day Parade, and they're just like, whoever, and that's something else that I kind of, it's not the main storyline, but it's just to kind of get the flavor of the people that Alex and Titus are around, is that they're absolutely 100% on board for any kind of celebration. And as during like the end of the year when there's a ton of celebrations by all different cultures and whatnot, the Muses basically have a giant list of what holidays land on what days, how they're celebrated. And so literally from like Thanksgiving through January, there's like parties almost every day to celebrate some kind of celebration that one of their acolytes celebrates. And so there's always like copious amounts of food. And at one point, Alex is like, "How do you guys do this?" And it's like, we like having parties, and we've been doing this for years. And it isn't just the Muses. There's other deities. So like during Thanksgiving, Hathor from Greek mythology, or not Greek mythology, Egyptian mythology, is hanging out, making food, and celebrating Thanksgiving. And so, and she's just like, yeah, this is awesome. And so there's people not just from Greek mythology, not just from Roman, not from from all over, and they're all, just because they're all immortals, over the years, if they've become friends, because obviously not all the immortals are friends, but the ones who have over the years have been like, okay, yeah, these are my buddies. They'll often hang out and get together for celebrations and that kind of stuff. So, yes, long story short, witches do exist. You just won't necessarily see them in modern day Muses. Maybe I'll put something in later books, because there's a ton of stories that I want to write with this series, with not only Alex and Titus, but like other acolytes, other time travelers, their kids. Like, as long as there's historical events that can be written about, I'm here. I'm like, I can make this into a story.
So, what historical event is in this latest one? Modern day Muses.
It is, I guess it doesn't feel historical to me, but like because the story kind of takes place in 2009, 2010. It is, when Obama became the president, because Washington D.C. politics, all that kind of stuff.
The end of the golden years.
Yeah.
It's been all downhill since then. Politically speaking.
Yeah. But so Obama, the politics in DC, the war in Iraq, that ends up playing a bit of a bit of the background, a bit of like opinions and stuff, because Titus ends up joining the US military in modern day Muses, because
actually, it is historical, because 2009 was
like 15 years ago.
Yeah. And in 2029, it'll be 20 years ago. So yeah, you are writing historical fiction. I'm sorry to say.
I'm right on the cusp of it. Like, depending on who you ask, some people say 25 years ago and older is historical. Other people say, 2015, like, because there are some people I've, met people who were like, they were babies in 2009, and, or they don't really remember anything because they weren't, old enough yet. And so, and then there's me being like, oh, like, let me get my cane and walker, because I'm remembering, like, my kids, bless their hearts, my oldest is 8 years old, and she's like, Mom, you lived in the 1900s. Like, yes, and And she's like, you're like so old. Thanks, sweetheart. So yeah, I've gotten that comment even from her friends. They're like, "You're from the 1900s? That's so cool. That was so long ago." I'm just like, "Be quiet. Y'all were born in like 2015, 2016. Shush." But I guess that was like for me, my parents were born in the 50s, and so they, all the historical stuff that happened in the 60s and 70s, I was like, "Whoa, that was so long ago." And my parents are probably, or at least my dad's probably like, "I'm feeling so old," because you know, that wasn't historical for them. But or even I have some aunts and uncles who, were born but and were alive before we had 50 states in the United States. And I remember as a kid being like, "That's amazing."
Wow. That's true.
And
Like some states came in, like became states.
in the 50s. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think. Alaska and Hawaii was it 59? No, it was before that. It was 50 something. Now I'm like, "Oh my gosh, when did they come in?"
I don't remember. Like it was definitely way before I was born. So
Yeah, it was after my aunt was born, and she was born in 39. So, um, but it was before my dad was born, which is 57, because it couldn't have been 59. I don't know. But yeah, sometime I want to feel like it was sometime in the 50s that Alaska and Hawaii became states in the United States as opposed to just like territories. But yeah, so 2009, I guess 2009, 2010 is sort of the cusp of historical fiction now, which I'm like, "What? What?" Um, but yeah, so Titus joins the US military, and that does set some of the conflict for him and Alex, because Alex very much grew up in academia, and being not being very open-minded to folks who are in the military. And this is something that I've experienced, like, working in academia, is that there's a lot of people who look down upon those who are in the military. And so I have some of that tension in this book, because for Titus, he was in the Roman military before the events of, book 1. And so for him, joining the US military wouldn't be all that far-fetched from what, he was used to, a very regimented, very, structured culture. Um, the weapons and the techniques and stuff have changed significantly in 2000 years. Um, but, having, how military works, he adapts very quickly to it. He picks up on a lot of that stuff very quickly. Um, but Alex has to that's one of the things that she kinda has to, uh, like, come to terms with, is she really likes Titus, she loves him, but how does she resolve her feelings, the stuff that she grew up learning about how very black and white, uh, ideas about what people in the military are like, versus, how she's feeling now, what she's seeing now. And, yeah, I kinda play with that. And of course, Fortuna, the antagonist, uses that little wedge to, cause trouble. And I'm trying not to do spoilers,
you
'cause
know you're
this
going to.
yeah, this book came out in April, and so part of me is like, in my brain, I'm like, "It's already out, people have already read it or are reading it."
Hmm.
And now book 3 is with the editor, um, and that's coming out in September.
What
Um,
historical thing are we doing in book 3?
Fez, Morocco. Have you ever heard of the University of Al Qarawiyyin?
No.
So it is the oldest, longest running, like longest um university, school of higher education. It was originally a madrasa. It only really became a university like in the 20th century, but it's been around since the 9th century. And the story is that you had two sisters, Fatima and Mariam
Mhm.
Alferi, who they were widows. Their family died. They were originally from Kairouan, Tunisia, but then their family came to Fez when Fez was still a very young city. Like that was something I didn't know. That was something that I learned when I was researching is that Fez was only created maybe 100 years before uh, Fatima and Miriam's time. And so, but there was because there's a lot of upheaval and political strife all around the area during that time. You had people who were essentially refugees coming to Fez, and that's um, where you had a lot of the population growth. And Fez was technically two cities that a few hundred years later become one city. Um, but that is where Alex and Titus end up because um, the legacy of Fatima is the Al what is now the University of Al Qarawiyyin, which has been around for over 1,000 years and inspired actually a lot of the first universities that were in Europe because you had people from all over traveling to Al Qarawiyyin to study there, and then they would go back to where they were from and take their own, bits and pieces from when they were at Al Qarawiyyin, and you know, it inspired them to create stuff back home. And so um that is the legacy. And the thing is, a lot of modern scholars think that Fatima and Mariam are um not real. They're mythological characters, which I'm just like, okay, that ties into my mythological beings being real thing. Um
Yeah. It
and
seems like they're waving at you from the pages of history and myth to be like, hey, don't you want to include us?
exactly. And the big thing with this entire series is that it is lesser known historical times. I mean, modern day Muses, I feel like is pretty well known because it's still fairly recent. But I mean, you know, I kind of with that, even if the major events of the day are still well known, um, that uh there are other parts of life that are less well known. So like how individuals were um dealing with all the stuff that was going on, how people who weren't famous, how they're dealing with what did the everyman, someone who's, you know, uh, I don't wanna say your average Joe, but like, someone who's like, "What do I do with my life going forward?" And they join the military, and how did that affect their life? Or you have people who one person is very academic, the other person is more leaning towards, military stuff. How would that affect that kind of stuff? So that's, um, you know, sort of the lesser known stories, if that makes sense. And then
Mhm.
when they go back in time, everyone like with book 1, it's in Herculaneum. Everyone knows about Pompeii. Not a lot of people know about Herculaneum. With Fez, you know, not very many people know about the history of the University of Al Qarawiyyin and how it was founded by um, essentially two sisters. But I mean, Fatima is sort of the founder, considered the founder
Mhm.
of it. But then the fact that she also um, founded the Al Qarawiyyin Mosque, and then her sister Mariam founded the Al Andalusian Mosque. And those are two of some of the oldest mosques that are still around in Fez, and how that those places between those two mosques and the madrasa um, basically um, created a space for Fez to become a cultural and spiritual center in Morocco. And even to this day, Um, People will say Fez is like the Athens of North Africa or the Mecca of Morocco, because of the spiritual and cultural influence that those places had. And so in book 3, someone's wanting to keep those places from existing in the first place. And so Alex and Titus have to go and help the sisters protect their legacy. And I won't give too much more than that, but it's fun. I had to learn a lot
Mm-hmm.
about Moroccan culture and like the foods and all that kind of stuff, and realized so like Morocco's known for its tea, it's mint
Mm-hmm.
tea, but Morocco mint tea has like a variation, like a type of green tea in it.
Mm-hmm.
And back during the 9th century, there wouldn't have been green tea in Morocco. It wouldn't have been brought over from the Far East, from China.
Oh.
Moroccan mint tea didn't exist until like the 1700s. And so I was like, okay, what would they have? I think I think this is something that a lot of people don't realize is how recent a lot of food exchanges have been,
Mm-hmm.
or when certain foods that we think of as being native to an area were actually not necessarily. So depending on how far back you go, the foods that you think are traditionally Italian are not necessarily what the Romans would have eaten. Foods that you think are, stereotypically British aren't what, the ancient, Celts and Picts and other uh tribal, people in England would have eaten.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the same thing with Morocco. A lot of the when I'm looking at like what are popular uh foods in from Morocco, a lot of those didn't come until later. It wasn't in the 9th century, they wouldn't have necessarily been there yet. But there would have been other stuff like there's a hibiscus drink. I guess it's like a hibiscus tea
Mm-hmm.
called, and I'm probably gonna butcher this, carcade. Um, and it's like, um, I wanna say hibiscus petals steeped in water, and sometimes there's, like, a sweetener added to it, and that would have been something that people would have drunk, or fruit juices. There are a lot of fruits that have been grown in Morocco since ancient times, including oranges. Tangerines are named after a city in Morocco. So,
Oh, I didn't know
uh,
that.
the city
It
of
makes
Tangier.
Yeah, it makes sense that they'd be able to grow it. Like they have the kind of environment that oranges
That
would
would
have
do
liked.
Yeah, and so a lot of citrus fruits were grown, um, in Morocco even from, like, ancient times. And they had, like, lentils and different types of beans and that kinda stuff, different types of breads and whatnot, um, lamb, all that kinda stuff. So that was something I've had to research and was absolutely fascinating. And also I put some of that into book 3, which is called Sisterhood of Fez, because I'm trying to I was trying to tie in. You have the sisters Fatima and Mariam, but also their ties um, to Cleo and her sisters. So, um, but yeah, a lot of people um, don't know about that story, that history, or too much about Fez. So, um, that's book 3, and then right now I'm writing book 4,
Oh,
which
okay.
sorry. I
No, go
already have,
on.
like I technically have, the first 5 books roughly, plotted out.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I have to fine tune some stuff, but I know where they're gonna take place and what's going to happen, and then the next 5 books are more loose. Like I know
Mm-hmm.
what what places I want to look at, what, what time periods, what locations. I haven't necessarily plotted out the next 5 books, but I'm just like, even though there's a lot of people who are like, "Oh, go, you want to have a series, but don't have too many books," and I'm just like, "Screw it." With this, I'm like, there's enough historical stories that um I'm I'm just gonna keep writing. And so the main characters may change out, but there's gonna be some long series because I feel like I love these books. They've been sticking in my head, since 2009. Um, they've been taking up space, so now they need to pay rent.
Yes, yes.
And
That's I'm
so
always trying to get all the stories that have been living in my head out to pay rent, or mortgage in my case. But some of the characters don't want to cooperate sometimes, so it's a work in progress.
they're like, I don't want to pay rent. That actually reminds me of a story that
They
I have
won't
no idea if I'd
do
ever.
the story. They know how much I want to write it, and I want to do this Joust story, and they won't let me do it. I've had the story since 2012. I wrote,
Mhm.
bless you, I wrote part of it, and they just won't let me have it. I just want this one story, and they will not let me have it. So I'm trying to make them. I
Yeah.
keep putting it. I don't know if you do this, but I list the books in the series in the front and the back of the book, and I keep adding it. And every time the next book comes out, I have to keep moving it
Mhm.
because they won't do the story. We
Exactly.
I have like all these things we mentioned in book one. Bless you, because I wanted to do this book two, and they just. Well, I'm trying to get it for book 12 now. That's where we're at.
But yeah, my characters do the exact same thing, and so I'm just like, all right, you guys are gonna have a long series because that's what you want, and that's what works. But so book 3 is in Fez, Morocco, and that's supposed to be coming out in September. Um, book 4, which will be in December. I had originally wanted to have book 4 and 5 by December, but I was just like, that's not gonna work. Um, and so book 4 will be in December, and it takes place in Greenville, South Carolina in 1917. Um,
Oh,
do you know where
that's an interesting time period.
do you know what place was in Greenville, South Carolina in 1917?
No, I know 1917 was around the time of what was in, World War One was happening.
Mhm. Camp Sevier.
What is that?
Um, Camp Sevier was one of the camps that the United States military or the government created for the military to train up soldiers for World War One once the United States decided to join World War One. And it is where the 30th Division, also known as Old Hickory, was trained up before they went to Europe and broke the Hindenburg Line. So anyone who's interested in like military history or World War One history would know Old Hickory, the Hindenburg Line, because this was a line that I guess it was a tunnel that like a fortified tunnel that the Germans were basically able to keep um the French and the English from getting past. And basically anytime they tried to make an advance on it, they just get decimated. And so when the Americans came in, the 30th division, Old Hickory, they were some of the American soldiers who were tasked with breaking the Hindenburg Line. And they ended up doing that. There were a lot of casualties, but they were able to break the Hindenburg Line. And because the Hindenburg Line got broken, that's what allowed World War One to come to an end. And that's why part of the reason why they were able to do armistice in November of 1918 was because that line got broken. And so um But I'm but the other big thing that happened other than the US joining World War One in 1917
Mhm.
was the Spanish influenza, because the first
Right.
The first cases actually happened in March of 1918 in Fort Riley in Kansas.
And
And
that was a
so
pandemic.
that was a pandemic.
It killed
And
a lot of
so
people.
sorry, it is super dry.
Okay.
It's drier. It's still dry here. So,
It's humid
but
here. I don't wish that on anyone. It's like 100% humidity or some 90 something percent humidity, which is the same
yeah,
thing. You can't
yeah,
feel the difference between 95% humidity and 100% humidity. It just feels wet.
yes, I remember that well, and just being like, I can't get dry.
Yeah, yeah. You go outside and your clothes immediately, slowly start sticking to you. You just stand there and breathe and you start sweating.
Yeah,
I don't enjoy
yep.
that. Would not
And
wish
so
that on my
that's
worst enemy. Go on.
and so that's kind of what Alex and Titus will in book 4 will be dealing with, is because they're going to be going down to Greenville, South Carolina in like August, September of 1917, because someone is trying to um, merge two very different time streams. And that's sort of the part of the background, the lore of this series in this universe, is that there are multiple time streams. There are multiple, it's a multiverse. And so
Oh.
um the idea with like Cleo and other time travelers, for the most part, they're trying to keep the time streams generally in the right order. Um but there's like an infinite amount of time streams because each time stream is based off of people's choices. And with more people, the more choices, the more time streams. So you have infinite time streams, and they'll sometimes overlap, but generally the ones that overlap are ones that are nearly identical.
Mhm.
So, there might be one time stream where this morning you decide to drink milk, and there's another time stream where this morning you decide to drink apple juice. Those are going to be nearly identical because the choice of what you drink for breakfast is not going to be that uh life shattering or earth shattering. But those are technically two different time streams. And so you can have a whole bunch of nearly identical time streams that are right next to each other. However, if you have two radically different time streams suddenly merge, and that can happen when people are traveling through time, that's when chaos starts to happen. And so you have individuals like Cleo, immortals who have been around forever, who generally try and keep the time streams in it, like they're trying to not radically change things too differently. They're trying to keep the right time streams going in the right places. And in the beginning of book 4, you have a unknown immortal, and they're assuming it's immortal because a mortal time traveler would not have been able to do this, who basically um merges two time streams that are radically different, um and then it starts affecting the future, the modern day, and they have to basically go back to where those two time streams were being merged
Mhm.
and make sure that they're not merged. And they find out that it is just before the United States enters World War One. And I don't go too much into the other time travelers. I may do that in future stories where they go, but basically at the beginning of book 4, Cleo's like, all hands on deck, everyone has to go to these different places to try and unravel what's been done. And she sends Alex and Titus to or Camp
Mhm.
Severe, and they meet up with uh, people from Old Hickory. They meet up with a couple of other immortals who are kind of that they've never interacted with before. And both of these immortals say, "Oh, like, oh yeah, we're connected to Cleo. Yeah, we're totally legit." And so they have to figure out one of them. Yes, they're both connected to Cleo, but one of them is more of a troublesome immortal who has
Oh
ulterior
no.
what?
Oh no.
Yeah. And basically they're both the immortals are not giving out all the information that they have. And so Alex and Titus have to figure out who is the troublemaker and what they're trying to do. And I, as the author, know exactly what the malcontent is trying to do.
Mhm.
He's trying to start the Spanish influenza early in the United States. So instead of the first recorded case being in Kansas in March of 1918, it will be in South Carolina in the fall of 1917, with the hopes that the people who the members of Old Hickory will get sick, die, that this will spread to other camps and basically jumpstart the pandemic or the Spanish influenza and keep America from joining World War One,
Oh no.
and which would then change
Oh
what
yes.
yeah, so the major
That would
changes.
change world events considerably.
And then yeah, so it changes world events considerably. And so you're having basically, so it's not just Alex and Titus who are saving the world, because like I
Mhm.
said, there's other time travelers who are having to go to other places um in other time, like nearby time periods, to help unravel stuff. But yeah, Alex and Titus have to basically keep Old Hickory from uh falling ill to the Spanish influenza, which um, is going to be hard, considering that the if you know anyone, like anyone who looks into the history of Camp Severe and other pop up military camps during the time, realize one of the big things with a place like that is hygiene. The hygiene is terrible, and
Yeah.
and even like plumbing and stuff, they wouldn't have had that. And so you're having tens of thousands of young men, who most of whom are from fairly rural areas, they're not from urban centers, are now in this like camp. And so there are contemporary reports from the time where um if people were doing their business, it would get lined up against the edge of the camp. And so if you're leaving camp, it just smells horrible.
Oh
Um
man.
And so there's a lot of hygiene issues, which for someone who's trying to start a pandemic is like, that's awesome. These people are already sick and nasty and gross. But for
Yeah.
someone who's trying to keep that from happening, that's another issue that they're going to have to deal with. So that's book 4. And then book 5, which will probably come out next year, um, takes place in, you might be familiar with this, although
Okay.
it's in New Jersey. Um,
I have gone there a time or two, being that it's like I can be in Paramus in 90 minutes if
yeah.
traffic allows.
Um, have you heard of Jockey Hollow?
Vaguely.
Vaguely. So book 5 is going to take place in Jockey Hollow in 1779, when the Continental Army winters over there.
That's why I've heard of it. I was like, the name is familiar, but I can't remember what the context is.
The
Is it the
funny
New
thing is,
Jersey Devil, or is it something to do with the Colonial War? It could be either.
and well, the funny thing is, so like growing up in Virginia, I'm just like, oh yeah, I know a ton about the American Revolution, Williamsburg, Yorktown, Jamestown, like, all of that. And
I
I
like
had
the
never,
bit where they conquered New York City, and like that was just it had to be liberated from the British.
yeah, but I had never heard of Jockey Hollow. And
Yeah.
so a couple other authors mentioned this, and I'm like, okay, this is a lesser known, going along the vibes of the lesser known stories in history. That's very much what this series is about, lesser known stories in history, whether it is the every day, every man, as opposed to celebrities and politicians, or if it is a place, that not a lot of people have heard of.
Mhm.
And so Jockey Hollow, and I'm just like, for me, who has grown up feeling like they were a buff when it comes to like colonial America and the American Revolution, to not know about this place, I'm like, okay, this is a lesser known. And I was asking other people, other history buffs, I'm like, have you guys heard of Jockey Hollow? And they're like, no, not really. And it sounds like it's basically like you learn about it if you are from New Jersey, you know about Jockey Hollow. If you are from the area surrounding New Jersey, you might kind of know it. But the further away you are from New Jersey, the less you're going to know about this place, because there weren't any actual battles that were fought during that winter when they were at Jockey Hollow. But it was a very cold winter. I guess it was one of the coldest on record.
I
And
mean, winter is sometimes mild when you're in New York, New Jersey, and sometimes it feels like Mother Nature personally despises you and is trying to freeze you to death, or bury you under ungodly amounts of snow. Like it could go either way. Even now, with the climate changing, you can either get a winter that's very mild, or one where you deeply regret not purchasing a snowblower. um, it's yeah. It's one of the things that living in the Northeast that's not fun about living in the Northeast is the weather is not predictable.
yeah,
You don't know going into a season what you're going to get. Like last summer was very humid from the get-go. We had no spring. It shot up into like the 80s and 90s with high humidity, and it was not a pleasant experience.
yeah,
This time we got lower humidity. We got low humidity, 70s, low 80s. It was glorious.
yeah,
It's just glorious time to be alive. You don't know what mood Mother Nature is going to be in, because the Atlantic Ocean is there. The jet stream is pulling all the weather across the country like a giant conveyor belt. You have the massive, lakes, which so you can get lake effects, snow, rain, whatever. And then it's like, does the jet stream want to pull things down from Canada, or is it dragging things up from Mexico? Like and it changes like every couple of days sometimes. So you look at the 10-day forecast and you're like, all right. And then you look at the 10, and as it gets closer to whatever day you're watching the weather for, the weather just radically shifts.
yeah.
It's 10 days from now, it might be raining. And then 5 days from now, well, it's not raining, but chance of something else. It's just, I don't know that anywhere else in the country the weather is as bonkers as it is here. And it's not just New York, it's the whole it's the whole like North Atlantic, it's the whole our whole northern
New
seaboard.
England, Mid-Atlantic.
Yes, New England, the Mid-Atlantic. I don't know about the southern part of it. Virginia and them. I think as long as there's not a hurricane, I don't think their weather varies as much as ours does.
Not too much. No, it's going to be,
because it could like drop into the 60s randomly and then be 90 the next day. Like
we did that in Virginia.
Possible in summer.
Yeah,
we've had snow in May, not a little bit, but like a lot, where you have to get out the shovel and do some manual labor.
that hasn't happened in Virginia. I don't remember that ever happening in Virginia, having snow in May.
We almost had snow in June once. It was winter really didn't want to, like, that's the thing. Like, is summer gonna, are we gonna get a spring? When is winter gonna let go?
Yeah.
So how much summer are we gonna get before winter decides to make itself known?
And so that's something that Alex and Titus will have to deal with when they go to.
Oh yeah, winter is highly unpredictable in New York and New Jersey. Very unpredictable.
And so they'll have to deal with that and then someone who is trying to destroy the morale of the Continental Army, because that was what Jockey Hollow, I want to say there was like 10,000 soldiers at Jockey Hollow that winter.
Mm-hmm.
And of those 10,000, 9,000 re-enlisted and stayed in the military or stayed in the army. And those 9,000, the vast majority of them were fighting at Yorktown. So Jockey Hollow was a big crucial point for morale
Mhm.
with the Continental Army. It was like, are you staying in for the long haul, or you're like, I'm done, I'm going back to my farm. And so there are a few scholars who talk about Jockey Hollow being the place that, like, the Continental Army, morale wise, that was a uh not a breaking point, but like, if someone was going to stay, it was Jockey Hollow that made them stay. Like, if they were done, it was you know they weren't going to stay past that point. And I want to say I'll have to double check this fact, but
Mhm.
someone was saying that Jockey Hollow was actually colder than Valley Forge. That winter at Jockey Hollow was colder than the one at Valley Forge that everyone knows about.
I mean,
And
it's
so,
possible. We've had winter nights that were like 0 degrees and below
yeah.
zero. And then it'll be like 40 degrees the next day. It'll be like, oops. Nature's like, I'm sorry. I mean, it's the weather is bonkers in the winter.
Mother Nature gave you the cold shoulder overnight, and then in the morning it's like, I'm sorry, I was tired.
I mean, we one, I think was it last winter? We got almost a foot of snow. It was like 20 something degrees, and we got like a foot of snow, and it was like the wet stuff, so it froze overnight because the temperature stayed in the
Yeah.
20s. Then the next day it went into the 40s, and I was like, what the hell? Nisha was like, we did the cold. Let's make things a little bit warm. And then it was in the 30s the next day. I was like, what in the world? Like, this is the kind of, like, that's the norm. Like, you just don't quite, you have multiple seasons of clothing.
Yeah.
You just like, what are we doing today? Weather, how many layers do I need? Yeah. When it's mild, it's lovely, but it's not always mild. Like, I totally get why colonists were like, yeah, I can live here.
And then winter comes and they're like, oh,
No, take me back.
yeah.
Send
Although,
me back across the Atlantic, because they don't get. I studied abroad in the UK for a semester. They do not get winter like we do in North
they,
in New York, New Jersey, New England. They don't get snow. It doesn't really go below 40 degrees there, and it's humid and it feels warmer. It's not as cold. It's the wind. The wind doesn't try to like
where were
cut
you in
your
the
head
UK?
off. I was I was in this. I was in London and I did some traveling around.
Okay.
I was in Edinburgh in February and it was very cold. Like, and we went up into the Highlands and it was very cold and snowing.
Yeah.
But it felt like a typical day in New York though. It wasn't colder than. It was actually a few degrees warmer that day, the days that we were up there, than it was back home in New York, which I found hilarious. And it snowed while we were there.
Yeah.
But it didn't have, it wasn't, the cold wasn't as biting.
Yeah.
I think because we're surrounded by a lot of water, there's the ocean, the Hudson
Yeah.
River, which is freaking
And
huge, and
humidity
all
tends
the
to be,
reservoirs. There's like just a lot of water.
yeah. Well, I feel like humidity in general makes hot hotter and cold colder.
Sometimes it can make the cold feel warmer. It depends. Like, it's weird.
Hmm. I Yeah, I am not a meteorologist, but that's just what I've heard and what I've kind of
Me either.
experienced.
Me either,
So,
but I've experienced days where the humidity made it feel warmer than it actually was, so it didn't feel as cold. Those were days that didn't have any wind. If you have humidity and wind, then you know you're like, okay, God, take me now. I'm done. I can't survive this. I'm tapping out now. um,
I will say that I feel like just like like the American continent, so like Canada, United States, Mexico, like all of North America has a very different, it's a lot colder um at a lower altitude,
Mhm.
not altitude, altitude's not right, latitude than it is say in Europe. So like uh where I'm at is at the same latitude as Morocco.
Okay.
Um, and a lot of people don't realize that. And so it makes sense that like Southern California is kind of the same, has kind of the same climate as certain parts of Morocco. But like London, I want to say latitude wise is on par with like places in Canada. Like like London
But
is a lot farther north
it
than
is, but they're surrounded by the ocean, which moderates their
yeah.
it moderates their climate. The
Hmm.
ocean does not moderate our climate. I'm
Yeah.
jealous. Maybe it's because we're not an island. It does not moderate anything.
I also think I want to say I remember like the jets. It's not the jet stream, the Gulf Stream.
Right.
Water, so you have water that is being pulled up from the Gulf of Mexico and warmer waters, and that goes up the coast of the United States and then goes over to southern England. And
Hmm.
I heard that that is that Gulf Stream of warm water is what part of it is what pulls hurricanes up the coast of the United States, but it's
Hmm.
also what
The
um
conveyor belt. It's the hurricane
yeah,
step gets on, and the conveyor belt takes it up the coast.
exactly. And then but that's that same Gulf Stream uh makes its way over to England and wraps around like the southern part of England. And that's I remember hearing somewhere that that's what keeps England fairly temperate, fairly moderate. And like in the Middle Ages before you had the mini ice age, you had like, you know, in the south of England, the south of England.
Hmm.
Um you were um they were able to like grow like grapes, like wine grapes
Hmm.
and make their own. And then like the mini ice age came and that, you know, things got a lot colder. And then once that let up, you know, things got a little bit warmer, but it still wasn't as warm as what it had been in the Middle Ages. And things are getting warmer in general, but I don't know if anyone is growing wine in England anymore.
Yeah. Although, like, I went to France also in February. I went to Paris, and it was very cold.
Yeah. I've
Paris was
heard that.
very cold, and I went to Rome and Florence and Venice in March.
Mhm.
I was That was a place where the humidity made it feel colder than it was, which was weird because I'm used to the opposite in New York, where the humidity makes it feel warmer when it's cold out.
Yeah.
Um, yeah,
I will say that
those
is part of the reason I love to travel more than I have, is just
don't just
all
don't
these
do it in the
different
winter. Can confirm it's cold there.
I've heard that, but summer, like, if you like, the Mediterranean, summer is still hot.
Oh yeah.
Like, so part of me is like, "Okay, I'll stick to, you know, Northern Europe in the summer, and then as it gets colder, go south and maybe, be dealing with, like, Italy and those places, um, when it's colder." But I still find it interesting that, I don't know if this is how factual this is, but there was a meme going
Right.
around about the girl who was like, "Oh my gosh, it's 78 or she's doing it in Celsius, but it ended up being something like 78 degrees Fahrenheit in England, and they're talking about how it was a heat wave, and all the Americans are just like, what? 78 is awesome in the summer." Um, but I thought it was kind of interesting that there were people who are commenting about how in England, their houses are made to keep in the heat.
Yes, they have like the tin roofs,
Mhm.
which yeah,
Everything is made to keep in the heat because it's usually so cold. So something that is, wouldn't necessarily be so miserable here, over there, it's just like you can't. And also a lot of the houses don't have air conditioning because there's no need
yeah.
for it. It's the same thing with like when I was living in southern China. they have air conditioning, but they don't have heaters. Because if you're in southern part of China, you don't need a heater. It's warm all the time.
Mm-hmm.
It was, I was there during the fall, and I remember going and visiting a beach. It was in the 80s, and it was like the first day of December. And so yeah, they didn't have, you know, in in the buildings that we were in, they don't have heaters even when it got really cold. You just bundled up because, there wasn't that need for it didn't get super cold like it would in like northern China. And so, um, I think this is me. I'm going off on a tangent now and being
Yeah,
like,
it's okay. It's like when you write about time travel and stuff, you have to think about that, like how, like if you're not going back all that far, you don't have to worry as much about the weather because it's not going to differ a huge amount from like what it is now. But like
yeah,
the further back you go, the more it's going to change, especially if you go back before the Industrial Revolution, because
mhm.
that had a dramatic effect on our climate, like,
Oh yeah,
and
it also
and there's other
depends
stuff
on
going
where.
on then too. Yeah, like if you go back to a certain point in the 1800s, you have to deal with what Krakatoa was doing,
Exactly.
because that had a profound effect on the world's weather. Um,
I mean, that's why you had in upstate New York, you had the
which no one
year.
can agree on where that exists.
Yes,
It's
somewhere.
this mythical place.
I'm when I'm referring to upstate New York, I'm referring to like where Palmyra, New York, so like northwestern.
Hmm,
Um,
okay, that's
there was
acceptable.
and then also up into basically, I want to say also up into like New England, like where like New Hampshire and Vermont. So that part of New York and
It's a nice area. I've been up there.
yeah, I have my dad has a house up there. Not for long though. He's thinking of selling it because he's like, I don't have any reason to be up there anymore. But it was like in the summer it would be
Oh
my
yeah,
family would go up there.
it's
But
it's cooler as you go that way. Well, except if there's a heat wave.
yeah.
Generally, because you're closer to Canada,
But
and
I
the
was
the jet stream like cuts across New York. So if
mhm,
you are above the jet stream, your weather is more like Canada. If
yeah.
you're below it, which I am always below it, it is whatever the jet stream is giving us today.
Yes.
I literally live like either right below it or like right inside it because it like shifts around a bit.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, whenever they show it on the map, I'm like, I'm like, all right, where is the northern part of my county? Okay, we're in the jet. Oh crap, we have a bullseye painted on us now for whatever the jet stream is giving us,
Yeah.
because that's like the snow line often, that jet stream. If you're above it, you get snow. If you're below it, you get rain. If you're on it, you get some strange mix of the two.
Some
And you should just probably not
slushy.
go anywhere. You could
Yeah.
get freezing rain. You get some really miserable stuff, and you should just not go anywhere if at all possible.
Yeah. Oh, but talking about Krakatoa, sorry, this is the
Sure.
history buff in me.
It's
Um,
Krakatoa is pretty damn fascinating because it exploded. People heard it like a ridiculous far away,
yeah,
and
it,
it was like no summer, and it was like
yeah, the
dark
year without a summer.
from the ash. Yeah, like I find it fascinating myself.
And the reason that like I remember like New York and what happened in New York and Vermont, New Hampshire is because so I'm LDS and the explosion of Krakatoa actually affected where Joseph Smith, who was the first prophet, the first leader of
Wait,
the
LDS is
Mormons.
okay, the Latter Day Saints. I was like, wait, I
Yeah.
know this acronym.
But the explosion of Krakatoa actually affected him being in New York when he
Oh
was,
wow.
because his family was originally from Vermont. But then because Krakatoa erupted and they were farmers, that year without a summer meant that their crops, their farm wasn't nothing was growing, and so they couldn't stay there. And so they had uh friends and neighbors who are saying, "Hey, go down south to New York, and the climate will be better. It's not as hard to grow stuff as it is here in Vermont." And so they end up moving to Palmyra, New York, which at that point, that the 1820s, um, is having a very much a cult, like a religious revival.
Mhm.
And then, that is where Joseph Smith had, his first vision, and all of that, all those key points for, the LDS church starting happened in New York at that time. And so that's a big part of just like church history, is knowing about the Krakatoa exploding,
Oh my
because
god.
had it not, they would have probably stayed um in Vermont, New Hampshire area, because that's where they were originally. But then because of the year without a summer, they moved down south to New York and Palmyra, and then all of those events happened there.
Wow.
So Krakatoa, like I said, it's absolutely fascinating from a historical, religious, cultural, all that kind of stuff standpoint. Um, and the
Yeah.
fact that it is the
Wow.
loudest sound ever heard on the earth. And like you said, people, miles, thousands of miles away could hear it because it just erupted so loudly.
And didn't it cause? I believe it caused earthquakes
Yeah,
elsewhere because it was so violent,
yeah. It
and
just went.
tsunamis, and like
Mhm.
people were getting affected by it who had no idea it was what was going on. It was
Yeah.
like
I wanna say you had, like,
people believing that the world was ending. That was like a real thing because like so much was happening that was like inexplicable, and they didn't really have ways of. It took a while for someone to piece together some of it, and I think some of
like,
it
because
wasn't
of
even
this
figured
freaking
out until
volcano!
like historians, years, hundreds of years later, who were, I mean, not hundreds, it was only in the 18 something, but 100
Yeah.
years later, who were able to like look at like records and stuff from places that weren't open at the time, like and see the effect that it had in China and in other
Yep,
places, because
yep.
there wasn't like we have now where
The
explosion
internet.
happens, you turn on the TV and there's geologists from all over the world talking about it, sharing information. Like that didn't
Mhm.
exist then.
Yeah,
So
exactly. And I will say this is so, like, for a lot of fantasy fans, they love the world building, and talk about world building and stuff, but then they look at,
yeah.
like, history, and they're like, "Oh, this is just boring." I'm like, "No. If you like the world building and, like, all of that kinda stuff of fantasy,"
Hmm.
which is one of my favorite parts, is that, um, history, some of the like I said, the lesser known parts, um, are just as fascinating, are just as awesome when it comes to world building, because you don't realize that there are these certain events that happen that completely change history, or what could have been, and that's just as there's just as much world building, I would say, in historical fiction as there is in fantasy. Um, you do have certain parameters that you do have to stay within, especially if you're not doing like an alternative history. Um, but uh, there, but figuring out, what caused how much impact does this event have on other places, all that kind of stuff. Um, And that's kinda why I like both historical fiction and fantasy, and why I love historical fantasy is the what if element. The how do small things cause big changes, or these things that you don't think are related actually are related. And, um, for example, like, with book 4 that's coming out that takes place in 1917, what happens if the United States never entered World War One? If the Germans had, in fact, accomplished their goals in World War One? What happens if they took over England? what happened, like, what if all this happens? How is that gonna affect the 21st century?
Yeah, that'd be fascinating. Like, and trying to speculate that there's just so many things that go into these decisions.
And you do the same thing with, like, world building of, like, what happened eras ago that are now affecting my main characters? Like, what happened, you know, 200, 300 years ago that now people, whether it is, political rivalries or, events, geological events that people are saying, "Oh, this happened because of the gods or the dragons or the, whatever." You have you have similarities between pure fantasy
Mhm.
and pure historical fiction of the world building aspects of, like, of what ifs and how does that all play out? And the deeper you get into both, the more fun it is, but the more you're like, "Oh, wait, this could have happened, or this could have happened, or how do I weave all this in together?" And I feel like that's where you get, like, really good fantasy, really good historical fiction is when you deep dive into how it would have affected, people and all the different possibilities. And then you're like, "Oh, yeah, this feels really real." Even if it is a land with magic and dragons and whatnot, when you get into that, it feels really like this really could have happened.
Yeah.
And so, yeah,
You can
totally.
get Yeah, and you can get lost in all that and the what ifs and the what happens. Yeah, so you have to limit like what you show in there, but like
Oh,
you can
yeah.
have myths and legends about other stuff and maybe it's affecting them, maybe it's not. Maybe we'll
Yeah.
find out one day if the characters decide to, do something to investigate that. Maybe they'll just ignore it because it's not important to them.
And it
Who
could be
knows?
that it's not important to them, but it's important to someone else, and so
Yes.
hundreds of years later, they're like, "Oh, yeah, there was this random story, but it wasn't any kind of big deal," and, like, this other group is like, "We have based a religion around this event."
Oh my.
And and
And then
and
you're like,
so
maybe I should have done something about that back when I first heard about
yeah,
it.
or
Is that a
even
situation that your time travelers are going to deal with? Like coming across something that they heard about and was like, yeah, this isn't really important. And then they'll find out that it like spawned a religion or something and then be like, well, maybe we should check into it and make sure
well,
it's not a bad thing.
not so much the time travelers, but the immortals definitely
Mhm.
have
What do they
have
do if it's like having a negative effect on the world?
so, because of, like, the time streams and
Hmm.
that kind of stuff, the immortals will, like, there are certain immortals like Cleo who are able to jump between time streams and, um, see what's going on and kind of I also play with this is in modern day Muses, you get to see, the Oracle Stone. So I play on the story of the Oracle of Delphi, and, um, I so during the beginning of the story, Cleo has Alex hold this what looks like a magic ball, like, with the fortune teller, a ball, and when Alex hold and, like, Cleo is very careful with this thing, and she explains to her that the first Oracle of Delphi was actually Apollo's daughter with one of the Muses, and that this daughter had epilepsy, because that's another thing is that
Hmm.
how people with disabilities were treated and what happens if those disabilities were actually, having to do with, like, the same genetics that, do time travel and other powers and that kind of stuff. Um, and so basically, Cleo says that the first Oracle of Delphi was, a immortal, daughter of Apollo and one of her sisters, and because of her epilepsy, there were certain things that would help her to not necessarily have seizures, or if she did have seizures, make them less damaging. And that and when she would have these seizures, she would see visions. And so this ball allowed her to see visions and understand them and have them be less chaotic and stuff. And so that's um how the Oracle of Delphi was able to see visions, was using this ball. It helped to channel her power. And um Alex is sort of like, well, I thought that there was like steam coming up from a crack, and that was what helped give her, visions. And Cleo's just like, the steam was basically for theatrics. Like, if you're an ancient Greek guy and you are wanting to see what's going to happen in the future, are you just going to randomly go up to a woman and be like, what's my future going to be? No, there's got to be theatrics. There's got to be, they're not going to believe a woman when she's like, oh yes, this thing is going to happen to you. But she's like, this orb is allows you to kind of see potential futures, the most likely futures. And she's like, but you have to be very careful with it. You can only hold it for a brief amount of time because otherwise it can be overwhelming unless you have epilepsy. And she's like, we don't know how exactly this works, but people with epilepsy tend to be able to hold the orb longer, and it doesn't have, they don't have as many side effects from holding it as other people do. But she has her hold it, and she gets to see two potential futures, and she has to make decisions based off of that. But crap, my train of thought derailed. Going into the with the orb, if the immortals see that something happens that this was something I didn't think was important, but it will be important, then they could see whether or not what time stream it's on, whether or not it's important to change, or whether or not they need to go back in time. And if they do need to go back in time, then yeah, they're going to send one of their acolytes and be like, hey, this needs to change. This thing that's going to be seemingly unimportant to you, that was unimportant to me, actually is important. It needs to be dealt with. And that's kind of what happens in book 3, The Sisterhood of Fez. That
it's just such a cool name.
I love it. I'm the first 3 titles, Priestess of Herculaneum, Modern Day Muses, and then Sisterhood of Fez, all came very easily, and I am struggling with book 4. I think I might go with
just make it like something obvious. I don't know. That's what I do. If there's X happening in the book, X ends up the title. I like to hit people over the head with what it's about, so you're not wondering.
I think I'm going to go with Old Glory and Old Hickory.
Okay.
Because does that sound like a fairly decent? Because like I had a whole
that
bunch
sounds like a cool name for a book. That might be like hard to annoying to fit on the cover for the print edition. Because it's
I will let the cover artist deal with that.
Yeah, because it's a lot of words, and you want the title to be big enough to be readable, but you also want a design of some kind, some kind of imagery on the cover, and that's a lot of words. They're going to take up a lot of space.
I will give a little bit of where the Old Glory comes from. The antagonist is an immortal who was the son of an ancient Germanic god, who some of the Germanic tribes believed created the German people, the Germanic tribes in the past. The antagonist is a lesser known son, because this particular deity in Germanic mythology had 3 sons, and then those 3 sons had a whole bunch of children, which became the 3 main tribes, and so on and so forth. But I'm like, what if this guy who's the antagonist was a lesser known son, son that none of the mythologies talk about, and he has daddy issues because he wants to show his dad that he's just as awesome as his older brothers. who the stories all talk about. And so he's like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make sure that the Germans won't win in World War One, and then my daddy will be proud. And
Aw.
that's really his plot. But he's like, I'm going to infect Camp Severe with the Spanish influenza to keep them from fighting against the Germans in World War One. Therefore, the Germans will win, and then my daddy will be proud of me, and I will make it into the history books and the mythology and lore and everything. Because right now, nobody knows about me, and that is his. So he's going for the old glory part, the ancient glory of Germanic mythology and that kind of stuff. And then Old Hickory is the name of the unit. And so that's why I was going with like Old Glory and Old Hickory.
No, it's a good title, but people might not get that until they read it. But fantasy books usually have whimsical titles, so
yeah,
I think it works.
Yeah. So I want to kind of have that same kind of history, like with Priestess of Herculaneum. That was, okay, this is going into, we're going into ancient Roman Empire, and with modern day Muses, it's going to be in the modern day. And then with Sisterhood of Fez, if you know Fez Morocco, it's like, okay, we're going with that different vibe, and with the cover art. And then with Old Glory and Old Hickory, if that's what I end up naming the book, I need to decide on a title. Because the other title that I had that I initially liked, but I didn't know if it was too weird, was Saviors of Camp Severe. And I'm just like, it's got the S rolling sound, but
yeah.
But that's where I'm like, like the first 3 books were super easy to title, and then book 4 is just giving me heartburn.
Maybe like put it to a vote, like
I tried that.
and
And that's I had one person vote, and it was for Old Glory and Old Hickory.
Then Old Glory and Old Hickory it is. Those who didn't vote are probably like, we're gonna read it no matter what you call it.
Yeah. So, but I'm writing that right now, and I'm just like, I'm excited to get it done and see and show people what other adventures Alex and Titus are going to be on, because modern day Muses, it doesn't necessarily end on a happy note. However, I'm like, it's one of those things where it's like, it doesn't end on a happy note. However, well, for Alex is not happy, Titus is not happy, but the things that cause that unhappiness are addressed in book 3. And it's not a long-standing unhappiness, if that makes sense. Because it gets resolved in book 3. But like I said, Fortuna was mad that they survived Vesuvius, and they escaped Herculaneum. And she's like, I'm going to make your lives miserable in the modern day. And so that's a lot of the conflict in modern day Muses, is Alex trying to figure out where how she fits into everything now, Titus how he fits into everything now, and Fortuna trying to make a mess of it and trying to mess with both of them. And it's fun. It's a fun book. I love it.
Do you want to read an excerpt so that we can meet the
Yes.
characters?
Oh,
awesome!
I will have to pull it up. So I have this in Chrome because StreamYard does not like
it doesn't?
It doesn't like Safari.
Oh, because you're on a Mac.
Yes. And so let me pull up Modern Day Muses. And see, I could, what would be, I'm like trying to, figure out what the best scenes to read would be.
Okay.
Let's see.
Just give us
Because
any context we'll need.
I probably won't read the end scenes.
Okay. I mean, it's up to you. You know me. I love audiobooks, so I love hearing authors read their work. So there's no like time constraint. It's whatever you think is best to show off your book baby.
So, all right, I'll read the catalyst scene where
Okay.
things change because before this you're seeing Alex and Titus adjust like living in the modern world and how they've kind of adjusted because it's been 6 months since the end of book 1.
Do they
And
like living in the modern world?
they do. And the fun thing with and something that I probably should have talked about this earlier
Okay, go ahead.
um with Titus coming from the past. So like one of the things with a lot of time travel stories that I've read is a lot of times the woman goes into the past and stays in the past. And I'm just like, I want a twist on that. What happens if the guy comes to the future? Because as a woman, I don't necessarily want to be living in the past.
Seriously, that was the one thing about the Outlander. I didn't read all of them. I DNF'd after like I think a Breath of Snow and Ashes. I don't
Yeah.
think I finished. It was just a lot of nothing happening.
Yeah.
Lots of plotting, but no doing anything. And she was just growing molds for penicillin for like that was the plot of the book. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
I get that this is important and necessary and you need this, but could we do something else while you are growing mold on your bread? Like,
Yeah.
we got watch the mold grow. But yeah, like she goes back and she's all like liking living in the
1700s.
whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I was like, no, I would hate it.
Yeah.
I'd probably get into a lot of trouble because I'm very outspoken and like some
You'd
of
be
the ways the
you'd be
fellows
the-
act back then, like not
Who was the witch
okay.
character? Who was the witch character in Outlander?
Oh God, I read it
She has
like
like
years ago. I don't remember.
but the one who basically like they hang her, but she doesn't actually die. She pops
I
back up.
don't remember. I
But
read
she's
it
like
like
from the 1960s.
I don't remember. I read it like 5 years ago, 6 years ago. I've read so many books since then that I
Yeah.
enjoyed more that I don't remember at all. I don't remember the name. I vaguely remember that I don't remember. Oh, maybe that was like I don't know.
Yeah, I remember it was in book 1 because I only read book 1.
I read that like a while ago. I only remember parts of like the last book that I read in it, and I remember the basic plot outline of book 1, but not a whole lot of what goes on in it.
Yeah.
I know it's a ring of stones and fairy stones, and that's how she goes back.
Yeah.
But
that
makes
was
some very questionable decisions.
Yeah. But that's kind of like when I was reading that, I was like, well, what happens if the guy comes to the future? Like, what happens if Jamie came to the future? How would he survive and adapt in our world? And then the other thing that I thought of is like if you have someone from the past who's come to the future, when it comes to germs and immunity and everything, how fast are they going to get killed? Because they don't.
Seriously.
And so I have that into the lore, into the magic, into the world of Titus coming to the future is that so at the end of book 1, she gives him clothing, like hand sanitizer, a mask and everything, and she's like, "You need to wear this until we get to the townhouse because the townhouse is protected. It's been sanitized, so that you won't have to deal with this. You won't have to deal with any germs that your body can't handle." And then over the next 6 months, basically, instead of being at the townhouse in DC, Titus goes to the mansion that they have in Montclair, New Jersey, and that is sort of their intake facility where they
Oh, wow.
time travelers from the past um, go and live there for a certain amount of time, and they get immunizations, they get, basically their immune system is brought up to the modern day. And in the beginning of book 2, you have Apollo is there because he's one of the people who's helping the Muses to, because his, in Greek mythology, one of his things was medicine, um, helping them to bring the some of the time travelers' bodies up to snuff. And so basically book 2 starts about 6 months after book 1 ends. And um Alex has basically been going back and forth between DC, where she lives and works, and Montclair, to spend the weekends with Titus as he's getting used to um the modern world and making sure that his immune system is up to snuff. And they spend time together. She gets him a used to or up to speed on modern day culture, including the Addams family. In this book I refer to uh Cleo and Janice as sort of like Morticia and Gomez Addams, but less gothic.
Oh, really? That's so fun. I love them.
And so Alex makes a reference to them being that way, and Titus is like, "Wait, what?" And she's like, "Okay, we got to watch the shows." And so they end up binge watching all of, like, from like the 1960s on, all of the Addams family stuff over a weekend. And that's the kind of stuff that Titus is going on um and during the series. And so the
Right,
beginning
right.
is them talking about basically what's going to happen now once he gets the go ahead to be able to go into the real world. And what is he going to do for a job? What is he going to do, when he's not time traveling? And he has mentioned to prior to this scene, he's mentioned to Alex that he's interested in the military because that's a connection to a part of him that was important back
Mhm.
in his time. And she's all like, I don't know how I feel about that. I love you, but I'm afraid that you're gonna get killed if you know, if you join the military." And so this is um the end of chapter 4, where she's trying to wrap her mind around the idea of him being in the military, and how is she going to deal with that, and is this actually going to be a reality? So with that, I will read the end of chapter 4. Over the
Awesome.
next few weeks, I tried to keep my thoughts away from the idea of Titus joining the military. Instead, I focused on work, applying to the Library of Congress jobs when I saw them, and spending time with Titus in Washington, D.C. as much as possible. With Apollo's medical clearance, Titus spent his time going back and forth between the Montclair mansion and the DC townhouse, and I took the opportunity to be Titus's tour guide. Calliope was still hesitant to let him visit downtown DC, so we visited some of the lesser known places around town and in the suburbs. While I wished we could have visited some of the touristy spots, I knew that the longer Calliope had Titus on restriction, the longer it would be before he could enlist. As selfish as I knew that was, at the same time I hoped it would be a while before the restrictions were lifted. By the beginning of October, though, I could tell Titus was getting restless. One Saturday, as I showed him my new phone and explained all the different things it could do, he kept glancing towards the hallway anytime someone walked by. "Is this boring to you now?" I laughed, trying to keep the tone light. My phone was a Motorola Droid, so it wasn't as fancy as the iPhones, but it worked for what I needed it to do. Titus shook his head, still investigating the phone and pushing different buttons. "No, if anything, I'm still wrapping my head around the idea. The fact that you can talk to someone on this anywhere in the world is it's as unbelievable as time travel." Handing me back the phone, he sighed. "I know I need to adapt more, get used to this world and make it my normal. I think that's why Calliope is keeping me from exploring more. Although, although what? I think she might be getting close to letting me go anywhere, or almost anywhere. Why? He grabbed my hand, but before he could say anything, Cleo entered the room with a huge grin on her face. Guess who has two thumbs and some good news for you two? Titus frowned in confusion. You? Cleo nodded. Calliope has cleared you to explore without restrictions. Your last test came back normal, so you're good to go. Really? Titus's entire body perked up, and even I straightened up. This was wonderful news, though there was still a heavy weight in my chest. Really, really? I was thinking, would you two like to head back to the museum? It's the last weekend before it closes, and Janice said that he could meet us there. I couldn't help but laugh at Cleo. It sounded like she was planning a double date. Titus looked back at me. Should we? I nodded. We could see the rest of the exhibit if you'd like, if it wouldn't stress you out. Titus shook his head. I've been wanting to see the statue Cleo mentioned, the one from my family's peristyle. I know the exhibit has more to do with art and Vesuvius's legacy than actual. He hesitated. There are no dead bodies at the art museum, I promise. Just paintings, sculptures, and other artwork, Cleo said, resting her hand on his shoulder. Of course, he nodded and stood up. Let's head out then, unless there's anything else we need to do here. Cleo shook her head, and before I knew it, we were out of the door and on our way. Titus only stopped hurrying once we got to the museum. Janice stood in the little courtyard, tapping on his phone. Even from a distance, I could tell he was concerned about something. But as soon as he looked up and saw Cleo, his face lit up, and for a moment the surrounding area seemed brighter, like the clouds had opened up above him. Cleo ran up for an embrace as I tried not to laugh too much. They still acted like they were in the midst of puppy love. They are definitely a cute couple, Titus said softly as we joined them. They are, but so are we. I nudged him, eliciting a grin. We are, aren't we? Salve, you two. How are two of my favorite acolytes doing? Janice continued to beam as Cleo stood next to him. Pretty well. I'm ready. I'm glad to be out and about. Titus looked around at the crowd and smiled. I think even with our other trips, Titus was still feeling cooped up. He shrugged at my comment. I just prefer knowing I can travel around freely. Was this any different than Herculaneum? Janice gestured for us to enter the museum, taking his place behind Titus and me. In some ways, yes. In Herculaneum, there weren't so many restrictions. I could travel freely. The only place I couldn't go was Rome. Here, I could see places I wanted to go, like New York City, but I couldn't travel there. I understand why. Cleo and Calliope wanted to keep me from getting ill from anything my body couldn't handle. Still, in your head, you still felt trapped. Titus nodded and glanced at me. Sorry, I know I've been distracted the past few weeks. It's okay. I squeezed his hand as we walked up to the entrance of the exhibit. I think I'd feel the same way if I were you. Despite the weight in my chest, I smiled. It's good that you're feeling healthy enough to go wherever now. There's a lot more stuff we can do. More museums? Titus laughed and I groaned. We don't have to go to museums. Washington just has a lot. I'm teasing you. I've enjoyed every museum we've been to. He squeezed my hand and I leaned into him as we entered the exhibit and stopped. Janice laughed. No matter how many exhibits of yours I see, Cleo, I'm always impressed by your creativity. Cleo turned around with a grin. What is life but a creative endeavor? Her grin disappeared as she watched Titus's expression. His eyes were locked on the statue in the middle. How are you feeling, Titus? Cleo's words were soft. I don't know. We walked up to the statue, being careful around the students who were drawing the sculpture. Whether for school or for pleasure, I didn't know. Titus continued to stare, and I noticed his eyes getting wet. What are you thinking about? How my entire family thinks I'm dead? Titus searched for my hand, and I grabbed it to comfort him. One day you'll see them again. Cleo's voice was barely audible. Then they'll know the truth. Have you seen them, Cleo? In their future? Much to my surprise, Cleo nodded. They grieve for you, but I've already spoken to Priscilla. Though I haven't told her where you are, I've told her you are safe. Titus turned abruptly to her. Priscilla knows I'm alive? In a sense, she knows you are not among the victims of Herculaneum, but I told her to keep the information to herself. There are those who would continue to cause harm to your family if they knew you were alive. Fortuna? Those who worship her. There are still some with close ties to your family. Titus nodded. So them thinking I'm dead is a good thing. It is. Plus, there's a need for some time away. Though I never intended it, it seems some survivors have come forward, telling the Emperor that you warned many at the risk of losing your life. The Emperor Titus has relieved you of the dishonor and exile from Rome. What? Titus's eyes widened, and even I looked at Cleo in surprise. I hadn't expected that to happen. Cleo placed a finger on her lips and gestured for us to follow her. Titus did, and I stayed with him, glancing back at Janice. He merely shrugged. Officially, it is not known whether you lived or died. Either way, you have been lauded as a hero for what you did in Herculaneum. When you do have to return to Rome, when will that be? Cleo shrugged again. I don't know when, only that it will be in the future. When you return, you'll be able to return freely to your family's home. Titus nodded, a big smile covering his face. He turned to me. One day I'll show you what Rome really looks like in my time. I laughed softly. You wouldn't ditch me if you had a chance to return home? Titus shook his head. I love being here with you. I would be sad in any time period if I didn't have you. I couldn't help but grin. Janice cleared his throat behind us. All right, lovebirds, let's continue. There's a whole exhibit ahead of us. I didn't know what it was, but after going through the exhibit, I felt different, lighter. It made little sense, but I wanted to relish the feeling anyway. I'd been worried about what would happen to Titus once he could go wherever, but now the feeling had disappeared. What did you think of the exhibit, Titus? Cleo turned around as we walked out of the museum. Now she looked nervous. It was good. There were many things that reminded me of home, and I felt like the entire exhibit was a portal of some kind, even if it wasn't. That caught Janice's attention, and he turned away from his phone. What do you mean? I had my old life in Herculaneum in Rome, and because of circumstances outside of my control, it was ripped from me. Not that I'm not grateful to be here. The modern world is still both strange and wonderful, but I didn't have the time to say goodbye. You didn't have the closure you needed, Cleo said softly. Walking through the exhibit gave you that? Titus nodded. I know that one day I'll return, but yes, walking through exhibit was like going through a portal from one life to another. I feel more peace with the future ahead of me. Cleo smiled. I'm glad to hear that. Having that closure is a good sign. She gestured for us to follow her, and we quickly crossed the street to where a vendor on the mall was selling ice cream. After buying some for all of us, Cleo asked, What plans do you have for the future now? I know we've spoken a handful of times about different options. She glanced at me and my anxiety returned. I pushed it away, knowing my desire to support Titus was stronger than my worries. Titus glanced at me as we began walking. The more I think about it and the more I talk to other acolytes, the more confident I am that joining this land's army would be the best decision for me. It'll be a second chance at a profession I enjoyed when I was younger. That's when the grief hit me like a ball to the stomach. I tried to focus on my ice cream, hoping the taste and the cold would keep me from expressing my emotions too strongly. That's a big decision, but I think it will benefit you in the long run. Janice's words sounded distant. How did he know if this would be good for Titus or not? Had he seen the future alongside Cleo? Alex, are you all right? Titus's words were closer, and I looked up at him, hoping I wasn't being too obvious. I'm fine. There's just something in the wind, pollen or whatnot. It's irritating my eyes and nose. Don't mind me. I tried to wipe my eyes and nose as quickly as I could. Are you sure? Titus looked deflated now, so I gave him a big smile. Yes, 100% sure. Hay fever. It hits at the most random moments. I'll be fine. Let's keep walking and enjoying the day. Our ice cream, too. I gestured with mine and took a big bite of it. Looking around, I could tell no one believed me. It's allergies, I swear. Plus, if you're joining the military soon, then we should make the most of what time we have left, not waste it worrying about my runny nose. Titus nodded, and Cleo gingerly handed me a tissue from her purse. I took it with a smile. Let's go. The day is young, and there's lots more of Washington, D.C. for you to see. And that is the end of that scene.
Wow. I like that they were in a museum, that it's a book about history and time travel, and they went to a museum for fun. Now we know what some time travelers do for fun. They go to a museum and look at old things that maybe came from the time period that they have visited.
Well, and the thing with that scene is the specific museum that they went to and the exhibit was the one that sent Alex back in time in book 1.
Oh.
So for anyone who's read book 1, if they read book 2 and they see that they're going back to that exhibit, that's where there's closure coming.
Mhm.
And that's also the same exhibit where at the end of book 1, when they fall back into Washington, D.C., they fall into that exhibit. And so because this is the last week that it's going to be there, it was the last chance that Titus could see the exhibit. And that particular statue is mentioned in book 1, is a statue of his sister, Priscilla. And so he even if he wasn't, initially knew that he needed that closure, going to not only was it a fun day to go visit museums in Washington,
Right,
D.C.,
right.
but it was also a way for him to be like, okay, this part of my life is ending and now I need to move forward. And, like he said after finishing it, he's like, I got the closure. It was like stepping from one life into another one. And so, like, that was my hope for the scene. And so
Oh,
it was
wow.
it's a fun book.
Yeah. Like, it's definitely sounds like it's a wild ride, but a fun wild ride, obviously. Not like a scary wild ride or anything.
But and like I said, there's more that will come. I am absolutely a museum nerd, which is why museums, I mean, the word museum comes from the word muse. So that's how I tie that all in, is that museums are kind of like, I don't want to say temples, but like places where people could worship the muses and do things that would bring them closer to the muses and be inspired and get that creativity. So the muses do have a deep connection to museums. So yeah.
That's neat. That's really cool. So like, was there like a particular, like, why did that statue send them back? Like, was there something inherently magical about that statue, or?
Well, the statue didn't send them back. It is, and if you read book 1, it's just that statue, when in book 1 was when Alex first sees it,
Mhm.
that she sees it and she's like, this is so lifelike and this is such a beautiful statue. And the interesting thing is, when this story first came to me back in 2009, this is based off of an actual exhibit that was in the National Gallery of Art. I'm sorry if anyone hears my daughter is crying. She is mad that the door is locked and she can't see mom.
Oh
2-year-olds.
no.
So if anyone is hearing her crying in the back, she is fine. She's just very mad that she is not with mom right now. But no, so the National Gallery of Art back in 2009 had an exhibit on the art of Herculaneum and Campania. And that's where this whole story started. And
Did
so
you get to see that exhibit?
I did get to see that exhibit. That's where, like, literally I was walking through it and I'm just like, oh my gosh, it feels like I'm walking back in time. And that's where the story, I was like, what if a art exhibit was a time portal? And it actually had, at the beginning when you walked in, this beautiful statue of a Roman woman, and people were sitting at the base of it, drawing and sketching out the statue. And then you could go into other little areas to see more art, but that was very much the centerpiece of that first atrium. And so I was like, what if that statue was actually from Herculaneum and was actually connected to the characters um, in the story? And in book 1, after seeing that statue, they then go upstairs and there is when I went to the exhibit, they had like a circular stairs that takes you up to the second floor, and you see other pieces of art, but the centerpiece was a reconstructed triclinium or dining room, um, that had like a mosaic of different Greek and Roman mythology pieces, like stories and whatnot.
Mhm.
And both in real life and in my story, you have the muses that are framed out in the mosaic.
Oh,
And
wow.
so I was like, okay, this has got to be this has got to be part of the story. And so
Mhm.
it's that triclinium that's been restored that ends up being the portal. And it's only once Alex in book 1 says, if I was back in ancient Rome, I probably would have been, a follower of the muses. I would have been, I would have followed them, especially Cleo. And then the
Wish
earthquake.
granted.
Yes. Yeah. And so then she ends up back in ancient Rome and being an
So
acolyte.
so it wasn't like a portal that anybody could walk through. You had to know, you had to be the right person and say the right thing to catch their attention, the
Yeah. And
muses.
the and as it was in book 1, there's a there's a museum curator who Alex talks to, and it's actually Cleo in disguise. And she talks to Alex before this, and they're talking about their passion for the art and culture of Roman, of this world and everything. And Cleo asks her if she had the chance to go back in time, would she? And Alex is sort of like, I don't know, maybe, kind of like, I like time in book 1 at the beginning. Alex is like, time travel doesn't exist, but I guess it would be cool. Yeah, sure. And then when she goes up there and she says, "Oh, I would totally be, a follower of the muses." That's when it's like, okay, yes, you are the one. Now's the time. Boop. And she gets tossed into a portal that no one else sees or remembers or anything. And all of a sudden she's in Herculaneum right before the eruption. And so then this scene is they've all come back and it's sort of full circle. So Titus gets to see artwork from his world, and he gets to see the statue of his sister who, when he was in Herculaneum and you know, and the volcano erupted, he, as far as he knew, this statue was um under lots of ash and pumice and stone and everything. So he never expected to see anything from his family again. And so that's where all of this was just very much closure for him. And then that allows him to move forward into his life in the 21st century. And he's all like, I'm going to join the army because I was in the Roman army, and joining the US army would be, you know, would work out well. And now Alex.
Because he misses being in the Roman army
Yes.
that much.
Yes. And so now because he was like a Roman elite, his experience in the Roman army would have been very different than someone who was not an elite. And so he's,
He's
and
not going to be an elite in the American army, though.
exactly, exactly.
He's going to be
So
a plebe.
he's going to have to in book 2 in Modern Day Muses, he goes to boot camp. He does training. He ends up doing airborne training. So he gets to jump off of high towers and platforms and experience being in a plane. And I figured that would probably be pretty trippy for someone who has never seen a plane, much less been inside one, that they are having to now fly in one. And so I felt like, the military experience would be, I felt like Titus would really, he would enjoy it, but it would definitely be a different from what he was expecting. So, and I have him also, not just in book 2. I'm like listening. My 2-year-old is still upset outside the door. And she's now shaking something. I'm like, what? But anyway,
I don't hear her anymore, so maybe
that's good. Maybe she's shaking one of the doors, so I can hear it, and it sounds kind of like thunder. But I'm just like, oh crap, can they hear, you know, her rattling the door in the
I
background?
don't hear it. So maybe StreamYard is blocking that out. Maybe because it will block out. I have the noise canceling on, so it will block out anything that's like background noise.
Yeah.
Most of it, like it can't. Someone screaming is a little bit harder.
Yeah.
um,
But yeah, so Titus, he goes to basic. He ends up doing airborne training. He'll eventually, it won't necessarily be in the books, but it'll be between the books. That he goes to ranger school. So he gets to enjoy the full experience of being a boots on the ground soldier. And even though like he, you know, you know, he'll deal with what it's like being in Iraq, and that is in book 3. And actually at the end of book 2 there is a bonus scene, which I could read if people are interested, because that segues from book 2 into book 3. Would
I'm
you like
down
that?
for it.
You're down for it? All right.
I'm down for it.
And it does hint at a little bit of what happens at the end of book 2. Hopefully not too much, but this is the last scene in the book. June 15th, 2010, Iraq. And this is all from Titus's perspective. So the last 2 scenes in this book are from Titus's perspective, as opposed to Alex's. I braced myself against the less than comfortable seats of the vehicle I was in as it rattled along the dusty road. These Humvees, as everyone called them, were barely more than a metal box with a few seats and supplies in the back. I was used to traveling in hard conditions, especially when I was still with my legion in northern Italia, but these Humvees made the army carts of my youth feel like a Letica. As we rolled over a pile of rocks, the Humvee rocked back and forth, bashing my head into the side of the vehicle and my knees into the back of the driver's seat. I groaned in annoyance as the song I was listening to paused, and I pressed the music device in my pocket to start it over again, anything to keep my thoughts at bay. Almost all the soldiers with me had something like it to drown out the loud, chaotic noise of the Humvees and entertain themselves while on and off base. Mine had been a gift given to me by a soldier going home. These devices were apparently not cheap, but his ex-girlfriend had given this one to him, so he just wanted to offload it before heading back. Not that I blamed him. The music device was battered and grimy, but it worked, and while I didn't know half the songs it played, they were still a good distraction when my mind wouldn't stay quiet, like now. I huffed, and the soldier next to me laughed and shouted over the noise surrounding us. Not too much farther, Varro. Then we'll be back on base. I nodded, too hot and tired to talk. It'd been a long day, and I wasn't in a mood to have a conversation. A new song started on the device, and I groaned as I realized it was a song that had immediately reminded me of Alex as soon as I heard it. It might not have been 100 days since I'd last seen her, but it was close enough. The chorus about thinking and dreaming of a certain person all the time, that certainly fit. Even when I didn't want to think about Alex, I inevitably did. Tapping on the device to change the song was futile, and as I stared out into the bright, scorching desert, my mind wandered back to the night at the gala. It still hurt, everything that had happened, even after my conversation with Janice, especially after my conversation with Janice. I'd been an idiot that night in so many ways, and as much as I hated to admit it, I'd been horrible to Alex, especially after telling her I would have rather died in Herculaneum than ever met her. That was a lie and far crueler than I should have been. I hated myself for saying it. Even if I went back and apologized to her, why would she forgive me? I certainly wouldn't have forgiven myself for saying something like that, which was why my stubborn ass had stayed in Georgia instead of asking Hazel to send me back to the Muses townhouse. I was an idiot who had put more faith in what Fortuna and her followers had said than the woman I supposedly loved. Janus was right, but so was Cicero. To err is human, but only a fool perseveres in his fault. I was a fool, and I couldn't see myself being anything but that. The song ended, and I shook my head. A future with Alex might be gone, but before I could end the thought, a loud explosion ripped through the vehicle. I was launched up into the sky as intense heat engulfed my entire body. Before I had a chance to react, all light around me disappeared and I started falling. A deafening rumble shook through my body as everything was ripped away. I hit the ground, feeling sand against my skin for a moment before succumbing to the darkness. When I came back to consciousness, my skin still burned and the sand underneath me felt like thousands of tiny needles. But I was breathing. I felt my undershirt and underwear still on me. In fact, as I moved my hands against my body, I realized I was relatively unharmed. Sore, but unharmed. Opening my eyes, I realized it was the middle of the day and the sun shone brightly. Most of all, I noticed how quiet it was. Except for a few birds squawking in the distance, it was silent. I'm glad to see you're awake. The woman's voice startled me, and I immediately rolled into a crouch as my training kicked in. In front of me stood a woman in a hooded robe, which swayed lightly as she shifted her weight from one foot to the other. She continued to stand in front of me, and while I couldn't see her face, I knew she was watching me intently. In one hand, she held a wooden staff. Folded over the other arm was a swath of fabric. Other than that, there was no sign of weaponry on her. Are you by chance an acolyte of Cleo? I continued to stare at her for a long moment before nodding. She sighed as she pulled back her hood, revealing herself to be an older woman. She wore a headscarf that framed her face, but her tan skin also resembled many of the Afri soldiers I had known and interacted with when I had been in the Roman army. I'm glad to hear that. While I am not an acolyte, I am a friend of Cleo's. He gestured with the arm holding the cloth. Come, wear this or you'll be in worse pain by tomorrow morning. Why? My voice finally found itself, but even with one word, I could feel my throat burn from dryness. She laughed softly. You young men seem to think that you are impervious to the sun's intense light. Though you look like you've spent many days working outside, your skin will burn if you only wear what you have on now. I gingerly stood up, testing my legs' ability to hold me upright. As soon as I felt steady on my feet, I quickly took the proffered clothing. It wasn't anything complex, but rather something I could slip on over what I currently wore. The robe was made of dark brown cotton, which was surprisingly cool as I put it on and pulled down the hood to keep my line of sight clear. As my mind took in where I was, I realized I might still be in Iraq. If that was the case, I needed to stay alert until I could make it back to safety. Don't worry, there's no one out here except for the two of us, Acolyte of Cleo. I have been expecting one of her followers to arrive any day now. Why? She laughed. Is that the only word you know? Shaking her head, she continued, Cleo and I have been conversing about a problem of mine recently. She offered to help by sending one of her acolytes. She was unsure at that time who could help. I assume it was you, since you are the first person I've met who is a follower of hers. The woman seemed genuine enough. I haven't spoken to Cleo in a while, but I might be able to help, depending on what it is and where we are. I looked around to see if there were any geographical markers I could recognize. Of course. Let me introduce myself. I am Fatima Alfieri. I will explain the extent of my problem in due time, but for now, know that there are people who wish to see the madrasa and the mosques my sister and I helped found go away. As for where we are, behind me is the lovely city of Fez. My sister and I share a home within its walls, and you are welcome to stay with us or at the madrasa while you are here. I nodded, having no idea where Fez was or what a madrasa could be. What year is it? If this lady was connected to Cleo, there is a good chance the explosion had sent me through time as well. Ah, yes. What calendar are you more familiar with? I frowned in surprise. Calendar? She nodded. Are you familiar with the Hijri calendar? I shook my head. It sounded familiar, but nothing I knew immediately. Is the Roman Empire still around? I knew from my conversation with Cleo and Janice that it had decayed a few hundred years after my time. If it was still around, then I had a better context for the time period. The woman shook her head. Are you a Roman? Yes.
Well, there is a Roman Empire far in the east, though I doubt that is the one you are speaking of. Are you familiar with the Christian calendar? I know many of Cleo's acolytes are. I nodded. That was the calendar I had to use since I arrived in the modern era. Ah, well, it is currently the year 859, according to the Christians. My eyes widened as I took in my surroundings once more. The explosion had sent me back in time, or I had been sent back in time because of the explosion. Come, I think you have been in the sun too long. She gestured to the ground near my feet. I suppose there's a reason that arrived with you as well. I looked down to see my tactical axe, a weapon I always had on me, half buried in the sand. Why had that arrived with me but nothing else? Not that I was complaining. As I picked it up, I watched Fatima begin walking back to the small city behind her. With nothing else to do, I followed, hoping she was truly a friend of Cleo's and I wasn't walking into a trap. And that's the last scene.
Oh, wow. That's like, wow. I need to read the books. I'm not a fan of reading on screen, but I may have to do that.
Well, books 1 and 2 are out right now on all different distributors, Amazon, you name it. Book 3 is technically the early edition, or the advance, not ARC, but early access is technically on my Ream. However, with all the drama that's gone on,
Hey, so this is Melinda, time traveling from the future, to cut in here and let you know that the conversation that follows this point is going to be a separate episode. It will be live right now so that you can head over to it. But at this point in the interview, LL Nelson and I got into some of the author drama that recently happened. I literally found out about this the night before I spoke to her. So in deference to LL Nelson, who came on specifically to talk about her book, not the author drama, I'm going to cut the episode here and go to the closing. And then if you go to the next episode, the entire uncut conversation that we had after this point about the author drama will be there for your listening pleasure. But I wanted to keep them separate because this is a reader-facing podcast, and I want to be sensitive to the readers who are listening to this, so that if you don't want to know about the author drama, you can skip the next episode. If you do want to know about the author drama, go to the next episode. So yeah, so it's a little bit weird, but sometimes these things come up, and it, like, something so seismic will happen in author community, and we can't not talk about it. Or at least LL Nelson and I can't. maybe another podcast host would have been able to cut it off, but like, I've been bursting to talk about this since it happened with anybody who's part of the indie author community. So I'm going to cut right now to the ending of our entire interview, where she just talks about her book, and then next episode is all about the drama. So if you want that, you know where to go. All right, I'm gonna send you back to Melinda in the past. See you in a moment.
But if you love Doctor Who, Greek mythology, kind of twist on time travel stories, if you like, Outlander, like time travel romances like Outlander, you will like this series. You'll like, Priestess of Herculaneum, Modern Day Muses, and Sisterhood of Fez that's coming out in September. So yeah, and if anyone has any questions or wants to email me, or I'm on all the different social medias as LL Nelson author. So I love chatting with other people who love historical fantasy, time travel, all that fun jazz. So that's my pitch.
The great pitch. Thank you so much for coming on here. And hopefully you'll be back in September so we can spend another 3.5 hours chatting about all the things, everything. Maybe
so. I enjoy being on here, and we'll have to chat in a few more months. So
You're welcome back anytime. So remember, all the links are in the show notes of the description as always, so you don't have to pick out a pen and paper or write anything down. Thank you so much, L.O. Nelson. This has been a double episode of Fantasy Lore and More, where we had L.O. Nelson speak about modern day muses and also about some indie author drama and how we're moving forward. Thank you so much. Remember to like, subscribe, and follow so you will be back when L.O. Nelson comes back to turn my world upside down and entertain us. I did not have that we will talk about Reap on my 2024 bingo card, but that's okay. Thank you. Have a great day or great night wherever you are.